Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and today I get to talk with Brad Bass, who's an old friend. He's a status professor with the School of the Environment at the University of Toronto. And he's going to do most of the talking this time because there's a jackhammer on the other side of the wall where I am. Somebody I haven't seen for 6 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. During that period of time, he's a scientist who's been doing work on the Great Lakes and the algal blooms. You pronounce it with one kind of G, and I say algae. What's the correct thing?
It is algae, but it's algal in terms when you talk about when it's AGAL, it's a hard G, and when it's AGLAE, it's a soft G.
Thank you. Now I'm very well informed. That's worth the trip. Okay, so Brad is working on this social problem that the Great Lakes, I guess especially Lake Erie, is in deep trouble because there's runoff from, I gather, fertilizer or cattle. I want to talk about that as well as his other professional activity, which is mentoring high school and university students who want some experience doing research. So he provides opportunities for them to do environmental studies. Is that right, Brad?
That's correct.
Okay, so let's start by talking about the Great Lakes, and then we'll talk about students later. What's with this Great Lakes business? What's the matter with our water quality?
So I look at one particular issue, which is the algal blooms, both what we call the harmful algal blooms, they're actually bacteria, as well as another algae called Cladophora in Lake Erie. They occur in different spots and they have different effects, but they're serious issues triggered by nutrient called phosphorus. Now, most of us know of phosphorus. We know it's a nutrient. Mm-hmm. We know that it's used to grow plants. If you buy fertilizer, it's one of the 3 big ones, the other 2 being potassium and nitrogen. What you may not know about phosphorus is it's critical for human health. Mm-hmm. If we don't have it, we basically will die. It's non-renewable and it's non-substitutable. So you can't go out and say, well, I can use these 3 other things that will do the same thing for me as phosphorus. We don't have a substitute for it. It's also critical for plant growth. And again, it's non-substitutable. Plants need it as much as we do. And it's also critical for the growth of bacteria and algae. If we give them a lot of it, they'll use it and we'll have huge populations of bacteria and algae, which we see in Lake Erie, as well as other lakes around the world. Lake Erie is particularly stressed by both harmful algal blooms in the western basin, as well as what we call Cladophora in the eastern basin.
Can I ask you about this? You got me thinking about bodies first. Yeah. And the need for it. I don't know what part of my body requires phosphorus, but I don't eat fertilizer, and I guess I'm getting it from food, and I guess there's never been a shortage of it in the food. Where before people started using chemical fertilizers, where did we get our phosphorus? And are there cases in which people have insufficient phosphorus so that they actually do get sick?
So the second question, I'm not sure I can answer, so I won't offer an expertise on that because I don't know if there are a lot of reported cases of phosphorus shortages at this point. As you said, fortunately, we do have it in our food. Before commercial fertilizer, the phosphorus would have probably come from 2 places. One is animals, so animal manure, or human manure would have been a source of phosphorus in the soil, as well as decaying plants, what we now call green manure. But essentially it's plant biomass that we leave on the field or dig into the field. The other part of this equation that's important is fungi in the soil and bacteria in the soil that were really essential for transferring the nutrient to the roots. and allowing the roots to absorb the nutrient. Mycorrhizal fungi, and there's a number of different species, types of these fungi, really help the plants or extract the nutrient from fairly deep sources in the soil that would be inaccessible to the plants and transfer it. It's almost like the roots have a straw, and that straw is the fungi, and they suck the nutrient through the straw. The bacteria affect the pH around the root, and that allows the phosphorus to enter the root. One of the problems we've had, and why this is such a big problem, is in large scale commercial agriculture, those fungi often are not doing the job anymore because they're not needed. We're basically bathing the plants in phosphorus and other nutrients. They don't need the fungi to get them the nutrient, and the fungi actually disconnect from the roots. They disconnect.
So this is a case I've heard that applying fertilizer actually doesn't do the soil any good. It's harmful. Is that the explanation for that you've just given?
That would be one of the explanations, and I'd be very careful to. I don't know if I would go that far and say it's harmful to the soil. I mean, there are soils that are deficient in nutrients for one reason or another, and you would want some sort of nutrient supplement. So I don't want to go that far, but I think it's one of the reasons, one of the potential negative effects of over fertilizing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've actually had a couple of talk shows with people relevant to fertilizer. I should have reviewed those before talking with you. But go on. And I'm sorry to distract you.
So that's, and within that context, when I first started, my work within the Great Lakes has changed, but the last few years I focused on the economics around algal blooms. And specifically, I asked a question: what does it cost us if we don't do anything? And how much benefit do we gain if we do something? Mm-hmm. I've also had a chance to look at the way we manage phosphorus, and I've been able to implement something called adaptive management, which people have heard about, and including myself, have found out none of us really knew what it was. We all had this mistaken impression that adaptive management was kind of just a trial and error process, which it isn't. It's really making decisions, taking actions that help you learn about the system, but not just you as the decision maker, but also the people who are going to be affected by the decision. So there's a collaborative process of looking at what did we learn about the system from this action? If it worked, what has it taught us about the system? If it didn't work, what has it taught us about the system?
Can you give me an example of an adaptive learning from?
Yeah, so your doctor, some people can relate to. You go into your doctor and say, it hurts. And your doctor says, well, that could be a number of different things. I'm not sure what it is. So let's take some blood work and maybe MRI and PET scan, etc. We'll look at the data and get a sense of what it might be. And then usually, of course, it's narrows 10 things down to 3 things. Then the doctor says, well, it could be one of these things, but it's most likely this one. So I will prescribe this medication for you, and we'll take a look at you in 3 weeks and see where you are. You come back, you're not well. So the doctor has learned that you don't have that illness. That medication was not the right thing. There are other things going on with you. So the doctor adapts the prognosis, the diagnosis, and the treatment, and tries again. So we live with adaptive management with our own health, and we accept it as the best way to go. When your doctor prescribes a treatment, your doctor is not prescribing with 100% certainty, your doctor is also using it to learn about you. And we have to do that in medicine because so many medicines are only tested on a very limited cohort of people, often white males between 25 and 40, and then we just apply that to everybody. So in the environment, this came about much later, but it is similar. We have an issue in the environment. We think it's caused by a certain pollutant. So let's see if we can remove that pollutant from the area, and then let's see what happens. If we remove the pollutant and good things happen, then okay, we've learned that. We've learned that this is a good method to remove the pollutant, and removing it seems to work. If it doesn't do the trick, then we have to go back and say, okay, why didn't it work? Was it the way we applied the management process? Was it the management process itself? Or are we actually wrong about the system? And we use other tools to try and formalize this. But it turns out the reason in adaptive management, where it differs from your visit to the doctor, is we don't just make the decision ourselves. The fact is we bring in other experts and other people who have other types of knowledge. So when we look at what happened, we're using a lot of lenses to interpret the results. I guess
maybe you work on a team with other people whose specialty.
Yeah, you work on a team with other specialists and other people who their knowledge might be more of a lived experience of the area.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. This makes sense.
So it's almost as if we had other people living inside you, and we could ask them about what's going on too, and their lived experience of you. And I think maybe we do that a lot in some health issues, where we bring in family and friends and say, well, what do you think is going on here? And so that's adaptive management. Involves this decisions basically are experiments. We monitor and we learn collaboratively.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. That sounds perfectly reasonable.
And the third part I've done is looking at some new technologies, primarily for removing phosphorus from waste streams.
Well, first of all, I think everybody's going to want you to prove that there's really a problem. And we don't hear a whole lot, or at least maybe in my circle, we don't. Mm-hmm. But we don't hear a lot about how bad a problem it is. Why should I worry that there are algal blooms in Lake Erie?
Okay, so first, it is a problem. If you look at any satellite image of Lake Erie in most summers, you'll see a green blanket spreading across from the west to the east. Usually it's in the west and it thins out as it goes east, but it's there. Algal blooms are not necessarily a bad thing, and if they happen once every 10 or 12 years, that wouldn't really be a problem. They're in the system, they're part of the system, there's a role they play, but when they happen on a yearly basis for very long periods of time, they affect the whole area because they cut out the sunlight. They're like a very thick mat. It's not like this, it's this. Mm-hmm. And they cut out the sunlight for long periods of time. When they begin to decay, the decay process often leads to something called hypoxia, which is a severe reduction of oxygen in the lake. Mm-hmm. Take away oxygen, fish die. It's that simple. Fish die because of the depleted oxygen levels. The Cladophora, which is another algae that grows in the eastern basin of Lake Erie, is different. But basically, once Cladophora begin to grow, they essentially alter the local ecology. They tend to dominate that ecosystem along the shore.
That's a particular algae.
Yeah, particular algae.
And what's distinctive about it?
I think what's distinctive, if you looked at it, there'd be nothing distinctive except it grows large. There's a large biomass of it. But what happens is it's very easy for it to detach from this. The leaves detach from the stems, let's say, and it washes up on the beaches. And then people realize they can't use the beach because the odor from the cladophora is so strong that it makes the beach unusable. So the other thing is,
what is the chemical that it's emitting?
that I don't know. I actually don't know what it is that causes that odor. It's when things decay, they tend to emit.
It's not hydrogen sulfide, is it?
No.
Good.
Perhaps more importantly, the algal blooms in the Western Basin are actually bacteria, and when those bacteria die, they emit toxins. And I'm talking about liver toxins, neurotoxins, things that are quite dangerous. And if they get into our water supply, if we're not careful, as Toledo found out, they had to shut down their water supply for a few days in 2014 when they detected the presence of a toxin called microcystin, just in a very small amount above the threshold, but they couldn't take the risk, and they shut down the water supply. In Canada, we're actively monitoring water supplies like all the time for this toxin.
Does Canada get any of its water supply from Lake Erie?
Yes. If you live within 50 kilometers of Lake Erie, there's a good chance you're getting some of your water supply from there. There are other places to get it from, but if you live within a certain buffer zone of the lake, your water is probably coming from the lake.
Okay. Now let me see if I can scare you. Because I've had some talk shows about scary things.
Yeah.
One being the Great 5 extinction events in the history of the planet, when we lost, up to 95% of all, living beings, plant and animal. And the guy who is the best authority on that is Peter Ward. All right. Peter Ward is a microbiologist, or actually he looks at the archaeology of previous extinctions and has written about that. Now, what he says is that the main, or at least, look, don't believe every word I tell you, because I'm trying to refresh my own without notes. But he said that some or all or many of the previous extinction events occurred because of the emission of hydrogen sulfide from the oceans. And then what happens is that the oceans become stratified, with the bottom part lacking oxygen for some reason. And that when that happens, there are bacteria that grow in the bottom of the ocean that emit this sulfide, and it's extremely lethal. But most interestingly, it apparently is that fertilizer can have the same effect, and that this, it's not just Lake Erie, but it's the Gulf of Mexico, and there are a number of places in the ocean that are already being affected by blooms that indicate the presence of fertilizer, and that the high concentrations of additional fertilizer could tip it into a situation that would be absolutely catastrophic. Of course, it might take 1,000 years to do it, but some people think, well, it might take a week. I don't know.
Yeah, so it's not the fertilizer, it's the nutrients. The nutrients can come from other sources besides fertilizer. So let's be clear what the problem is. The problem is the excess nutrients. Nitrogen and phosphorus tend to be the excess nutrients.
But you said that the fertilizer had hypoxia kind of thing.
No, what happens is when the bacteria that are triggered by phosphorus or nitrogen die, they are basically consumed by other bacteria, which uses up a lot of oxygen.
Okay.
That's what leads to the hypoxia. And the reason why you get these large zones is you get stratification because of warming. So you get a bottom layer of the water body that's cold and a top layer that's warm. And when you have that, it's very stable. So usually what should happen is the wind should come along and mix up the water. And so the top goes down to the bottom comes up to the top. And this is a reoxygenation process. That's what happens in lakes, and on a much larger scale, it happens in the ocean. But if you get long periods of stable warm temperatures, and what you end up getting is you get this stratification of the water body where you have the warm water on top, the cooler water on bottom, and it's in that cooler layer where you're getting that hypoxia, and there's nothing to mix up. Until you get that mixing, there's nothing to refresh that bottom layer. This is what happens in freshwater lakes. And I have to admit, I haven't looked at the oceans, but I'm assuming it's a similar process. So if you get really long periods where that mixing can't take place, and you get the stratification Peter talks about, you're going to get these large hypoxic, or maybe even anoxic. Anoxic is no oxygen. So these large anoxic or hypoxic zones that, yes, the only certain types of bacteria that don't require oxygen would be able to survive. And
he gives another explanation to it having to do with global warming, something about the changing currents in the Arctic or something means
right.
there are less storms, and you need surface storms to keep stirring the oxygen.
Right. Same idea. He's now going a little bit farther as to why the stability is in place related to climate. It's the same thing in the Great Lakes or any lake. The reason why a lake becomes stable is because the normal, weather that you would get to keep stirring it up isn't there. And it's because of a change. In our case now, it's because of a change in the climate. So there are these long periods of where, because of the temperature and the lack of the wind, the lake's remaining stable. In the ocean, it's caused by the change in these currents that he's talking about, but it's the same thing. The ocean needs the storms to stir it up, so to mix up the layers. And if those storms are not happening at the right time, then you get these long periods of stability, which if the bottom layer is hypoxic, or then it's going to wipe out a lot of critters, let's say, who require the oxygen.
I have another theory of my own, because I read someplace else, somebody who didn't connect it to this at all, but it's about whales. That whales, apparently, we only have a small fraction of the number of whales that used to exist. But these guys not only contain a hell of a lot of carbon themselves and keep it there until they die, but they also come to the surface and leave their poop, which makes for algae. But the beauty, the real interesting thing from this point of view is they go up and down all the time. Yeah. And they spend their time stirring up the ocean. And if you don't have enough of them, this has to contribute. This is my theory. Has to contribute to the stratification of the ocean.
The only, again, I don't know, and if they played a role in mixing up the ocean, but I think their role would have been geographic. It wouldn't have covered the whole ocean. It would have covered parts of the ocean, and storms would have covered other parts of the ocean. So it might have been a number of things. I have to admit, I never thought of the role of whales in that way. So I can't actually comment on your theory. And unfortunately, we can't go back and rewind our history to test that out. Because if we could maybe keep the whales alive. So it's a very intriguing concept. But one thing you are right about is that the decline in whale populations is you could call it catastrophic. It's that severe. A lot of people may not realize how severe it is, but there are some species of whales where we're talking about hundreds left in the ocean. But again, it's not my area of specialization. One thing I want to bring to your first question: why should you care?
Yeah.
So a lot of people they have a trouble with that question until you can put a price tag on it. So just for the Canadian economy, actually really the regional economy in Southern Ontario, the annual cost of algal blooms, we estimate is over $400 million a year. Now, the Ontario economy can absorb $400 million of inactivity. It can absorb that reduction. So let's put that into context. The new bridge being built, the Gordie Howe Bridge being built to connect Windsor to Detroit, the benefits of that bridge will roughly be equivalent to the cost of the algal blooms. They're on the same order of magnitude. So even though you might say, well, $400 million doesn't seem to be like a whole lot compared to the size of the economy, it's on the order of magnitude of a large infrastructure project in terms of the benefits. So if you're going to build a large infrastructure project to bring hundreds of millions of dollars of benefits a year, you're basically just replacing the benefits we're taking out because of the algal blooms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's you. I didn't have to be sold the importance of it, but
well, maybe some of your listeners had to be sold, and I just wanted to make them aware that we can look at this from the perspective of human health, potential health issues, of ecology, but if you require it, we can look at it from the perspective of economics.
All right, so you have a handy dandy gizmo that's going to capture the stuff and recycle it, right?
Unfortunately, it's not one handy dandy gizmo, but there are technologies, some of them Canadian, that can pull the phosphorus, some of it out of the wastewater treatment plants and turn it into fertilizer, which is being done. And as I said, it's nice to know there's a Canadian company at the lead in that work. There's other technologies that can take manure on the farm and, again, extract phosphorus directly from the manure. So, and you know what the best phosphorus recycler is a plant. You put a plant in the ground. If there's waste nutrient, the plant needs it. It'll grab it too. If you take out one source of phosphorus is the water you see running down the street during a storm. Has a lot of chemicals in it in general, not just, but it includes nutrients. If that water goes through a patch of trees, those trees are going to do a great job at cleaning the crap out of that water. Mm-hmm. So we don't really need necessarily gizmos that I have to create. We have nature has already provided us with probably what we need. The difference is when the trees take out the phosphorus, they're not going to give it back to us as fertilizer. They're going to use it. They're going to grow. Maybe they'll give us shade. Maybe they'll give us food. Maybe they'll give us oxygen. Maybe they'll help cool the planet. Maybe they'll sequester more carbon. Mm-hmm. But it'll get used. The phosphorus will get used, but it won't be given back to us as a fertilizer or industrial component. But trees and other plants really, and other bacteria are really the best. Nature already gave us the machinery in which to maintain that balance. Mm-hmm. We just, so we don't need anything that we don't already have.
Okay, well, that makes me feel better. That we will, at least it's not going to just... I
should say we don't need it. We probably do need the other things, but we can certainly, we're not using what nature has given us enough, let's say.
But this is another brilliant argument for urban forestry, which is one of my pet projects. I really think everybody should tear up their lawns and plant a little forest in the.
I think the Japanese have shown us, a Japanese scientist like Miyawaki, I think is his name, and they call the forest Miyawaki Forest. Yep.
Miyawaki.
These might be great things that really should be given a lot more trials. And what I like about his idea is, a forest is a forest. It's not that it's not that he's the first one to think of an urban forest. His forests grow very quickly.
Mhm.
And so he people think about this as a great way for carbon sequestration, but if you get a fast growing forest, you're going to also get all the other benefits on the water side from it.
Mhm.
So I agree with you on that. I am 100% behind you on that one. That one of the issues we run so Minnewaukee Forest, where the great for meta is, you walk by, you see a little piece of land that nobody's built anything on because it's too small or just not in the wrong spot. And even though it might be right downtown, it actually has no value. Nobody really wants it. Those are the pieces of land where we should be. I won't use the word trialing. Trialing is not a word, but we should essentially set up trials for some of these ideas. The issue is, though, we are building new developments where we're actually. You look at some of the new townhouse developments that are being built all over the province, and some of them are everything's so tightly packed. You're not getting those pieces of land that you're not even getting yards.
Yes, but here's something coming up that listen. Apparently, electric vehicles are going to be combining with driverless vehicles, so that within 10 years, if not sooner, you're not going to even want to have a car. And those electric vehicles, you can call them, and like with Uber, they come within 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And they'll be vastly cheaper because you don't have to pay the driver, and the electricity is much cheaper than fossil fuels anyway. So the streets will be full of electric taxis, but you won't want to have a garage, and you won't want any parking lots, and won't even need parking spaces on the street. Because when they come and pick you up, they will pick you up and drive on, and then they will drop you and drive on, and they don't park. So they don't need parking places. So we're going to have all of these parking lots, and along the streets, all of these places that are now used for cars, we can dig them up and put trees.
Yeah, I really love this idea for a few reasons. One, but I think what I really like is that I can get into the car and I can sleep. I can close my eyes. And then just open them when we get there, unless I want to watch where we're going. But so I like that part. But yeah, this idea that a total rethinking of the urban space that will be driven by two technological changes: driverless vehicles and electric vehicles, and the acceptance of something like Uber that we've already accepted, and that I can now look at. Even if I have to purchase one more vehicle, it would be maybe the last vehicle I would have to purchase. I'm not sure how much my current vehicle will hold on, but I'm actually really proud of this, of the work I've been doing with students for many, many years. And it ties into this. It's not unrelated. So how did this come about? There were two things that happened simultaneously. One, high school students discovered that I was willing to give them good or bad advice on research projects. But I was willing to at least listen to what they were talking about and seeing if I could give them any advice whatsoever. And a number of those students, I was very proud of them. I guess I gave them good advice. They went on to win national or international awards for their research. But that was very limited activity. But at the same time, I was developing a software, which we call Cobweb. And Cobweb was actually developed to examine surprise in an abstract way. So I really was only after one question with Cobweb. And I brought in students to help me test the software. This was back in 1999. Nina Sue was the first student. And now, forgetting the name, there was a student that came in 2002, and all of a sudden, of course, I forget her name, but she looked at the software after running all these tests and said, I think I could look at invasive species with your software. And I said, really? Well, that sounds interesting. Go ahead and try it. Because it wasn't designed for that. And sure enough, she built a model of invasive species and gained some insights from it. I said, wow, isn't that? So software I envisaged to study the idea of surprise, in other words, unexpected collapse in systems in an abstract manner. Students started to come in and they would look at the software, and they, with each group, would just come up with these new ideas, things I could never see in the software. And they would look at it and say, well, I think I could do this. And it's like, really? So we've had students use the software for heart attacks and Alzheimer's and the forest farm dynamics. Years ago, a student actually built the model of what is now a tragic situation, but the Ukrainian-Russian Eastern Ukraine situation. He actually modeled that dynamic with the software. Now, don't say, gee, Brad, you did no, I just basically said, here it is. And it's like, they would just see these things. And then sometimes they come to me and now they say, I'm interested in this problem. And it was like, I have no idea if you could address that issue. But often they find a way and they do address the issue. What's also surprising is a software developed to model surprise actually seems to work for all these situations where you don't want surprise, you want it to work. So I've basically have put together a program with the help of some other people who've been helping me along the way. But I think if I start to mention them, I'll forget someone and then someone else will be insulted. So I'll just thank all of them and I won't mention any specific names. And we provide an opportunity for university students, or really anybody, but it's turned out the two groups that have taken advantage of it are university students and high school students. And when we started this, we were a bricks and mortar type of arrangement, come to the computer lab and learn how to use the software, and, we either work on something I'm interested in. So for example, the two issues that I might have students work on next year, one might have to do with vertical wetlands constructed in the vertical. It's another one of these technologies I'd like to assess, and network intelligence.
Hold on. What in the world is vertical?
Don't you want to get me started on? You might be sorry, but okay.
No, keep going, because I think I'm gonna have to edit out some just because of the jackhammer.
Most people know what a wetland is. What they may not realize is wetlands, take up quite a bit of space. And a lot of times we want the benefits or need the benefits of wetland, but we don't have the space to build one. So there have been people who've been building essentially vertical ecosystems for a number of different reasons since 1985. One of them lives in the GTA, probably the creator of this whole idea. And I looked at his work and the work of a few others, and I realized these things are basically doing what a wetland does, but in the vertical. And they take up the footprint is much smaller, and we can put them, our flexibility of placement has increased dramatically when we build in the vertical. It allows us to put them in cities, but also it allows us to put them on land where we don't want to take out a hectare or 3 hectares or 4 hectares, but taking out essentially a meter, probably with maybe 3 meters, and building up is quite doable. It turns out, I thought I was so original. I thought, wow, this is like my original idea. And then I had students who agreed to help me go through the literature. Turns out there had been this last 10 or 15 years, you can find a number of articles on what people call constructed flow vertical wetlands. I was happy to be vindicated, but also very upset that I wasn't quite as original as it just sort of shows maybe there really are no new ideas under the sun. We just keep recycling the same ones. But in building a model of this, so like I can tell you how to actually build a real wetland, but in building a simulation models, you can explore some questions without the cost and without the risk of breaking the thing. We've run into a certain problem of we can build the zones, we can put species in the zones, they can interact, we can do all this in the computer. But if we try to have multiple species in each zone, so to mimic the idea that maybe we have 3 types of fish or 3 types of invertebrates or different types of plants, the model then starts to break down. And this is a problem we've been trying to solve for many, many years. And it might be an unsolvable problem within the way we've written the software. And I want to try and find that, give that another crack. So a student might work on that problem. But that's one of my issues, that if a student comes to me and says, gee, I don't know what to do you have a problem? I'd say, well, there's this conceptual idea that this issue that maybe you'd like to help me solve. Many students have their own ideas. They don't need me. They actually have their own ideas of what they want to work on. Under COVID, we actually had to jump online. We either had to stop it altogether, and I almost did that because I thought initially COVID would basically sideline us for 2 or 3 months. I said, we'll just take a break. We'll come back in 3 months. Of course, that didn't happen. We were sidelined for 2 years. I decided, instead of waiting for that, why don't we set up something online? And it was only supposed to be for about 15 students who were finishing off projects to get them through, this period of COVID that was supposed to only be 3 months. And what happened was, for whatever reason, maybe because people were locked down, I started to get all these inquiries from students about this program. Not doing any marketing. I just kept my mouth shut, didn't do much at all. And they just get 5 emails a week. And, we were having meetings of 70 students online, not just from the GTA. They were coming in from all over North America, sometimes from other parts of the world. So maintaining both has been a problem, because it's just a strain on people's, time capacity. But we've become very innovative in trying to maintain connections to people online in different countries, as well as going back to we had I won't say our first, I think it's our second in-person meeting yesterday, which was great. It was great to be able to do that again. So the idea is not that difficult. You have an idea, you don't know how to explore it, you're only a student, you don't have a budget for a laboratory. Okay, maybe we can help you. Or you've heard about this career called research. You sort of know what medicine is, you know what mechanics is, you know what marine archaeology is, perhaps, you know what dog walking is, you know what the vet does, you know what the dentist does. What does a researcher do? Okay, maybe I can show you that, because quite frankly, we could have a real shortage of researchers in 10 years. And so we really need to be exposing our younger people to research as a career. But if you never try it, why would you go into it? If you don't know what they do, why would you go into it? So fill a number of different functions. Hopefully, a few students who've met me have gone into research, who might have gone into other professions. And hopefully a few of them have been able to maybe just explore something that they would have never been able to explore.
That's fabulous. That's really wonderful. Keep going.
Well, the reason I'm putting that, the invitation is still there. So if you are a student and you're watching this and you're saying, well, I have a research question that's been bugging me for the last, 5 years. I can't find a way to answer it. Please, we'd like to talk to you, see if our approach would be suitable for your question. I don't guarantee 100% compatibility, but we're certainly willing to listen to you, what you want to do, and work with you on a possible solution if there's a fit between what our software does and what you're asking.
So
Uh,
you have resources that you can make available to them.
yeah, yes. So because we're not using wet labs, we're not doing field. I mean, we're not doing some of the nice things that researchers do. I won't be able to put you in a laboratory with the latest gizmos, as you call them. I won't be able to put you in the field. You won't be taking interesting trips to isolated areas in northern Ontario and collecting samples of this or that. I can't give you that experience, but that's not germane to the research experience. What's germane is the idea of you're asking a question that maybe nobody's asked before, and you're now being given an opportunity to try and answer that question without having to spend, hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars.
Tell me something about your vertical wetlands and having students working on that. What are the gadgets that you do? What does a
Oh,
vertical wetland look like?
um, so if you were to go online, anybody can do this, and you were to just Google. I don't know if you want me to give you specifics. There are actually 3 examples in the GTA, but basically, I want you to imagine a system where we have fish tanks on the bottom, and then above that, we might have another construction that has other types of plants or animals in it, and then we'll have something on top of that that has other types of plants. And then we have something at the very top that just might literally be a home for bacteria. And these things are all able to interact with each other. So everything maintains everything else, but it can also be used to keep the water. It cleans the water itself. It cleans its own water. Now, there are people who are building these things almost as a calling. In other words, they're not trying to produce food. They're not necessarily trying to produce clean water. This is just something they think needs to be done. And they've done some incredible things, building like systems where they can maintain turtles without having to clean the turtle tank because the system cleans it for them. Other people who've actually built these systems in a way that allows them to do indoor farming, but not just about both plants and animal protein, fish protein, and set up fairly large systems to do that, but do it at a very low cost. There are other people who, I had students, I was inspired by a trip to New Orleans and this is when I first used to actually literally build a wetland, an artificial wetland and it was initially intended for people in New Orleans to raise tilapia with certain plants, herbs. And I had students here who designed this, who came up with a design. We took it to a high school. This was back in 2010 or 2011. I think it was 2011. We took it to a local high school, and that teacher knew me. That teacher had come with me on down to Pennsylvania. I put together a non-credit course on building these things, and he came down with me. He was very inspired. This teacher runs the Green Industries program at Don Mills Collegiate, and basically his students over the years built this system, modified it somewhat. For example, it's no longer tilapia, it actually raises native fish, but they built this system in a high school, and they monitor it. I mean, they keep it. It's just an incredible project that they did. And this isn't really a vertical wetland, except, the plant walls go vertical. It's really spread out a little bit, but it's the same idea. It's the same idea that of taking the functions of a wetland, putting them in a artificial construction, an engineered construction, and keeping, wetland species alive, or keeping, fish and plants alive, but also in doing that, they feed each other, they clean their own water. So that's when we talk about a vertical wetland, that's the type of thing I'm thinking about. But as I said, the systems, the three systems I've described, all look different. They all have different principles, but they still basically put the fish at the bottom, and they recycle water through the plants back to the fish, and the fish waste becomes the nutrients for the plants.
I'm interested though in the notion of the peat that gets formed in wetlands and preserving the peat. But you wouldn't be creating new peat in this.
No, we're not doing that. We don't touch on that issue. I understand. No, I understand that. That's a totally different issue that we don't really address. This is, yeah, these are not peat creating devices. The fact that you can either create devices, wetlands that clean air and water, or raise or can produce food, I think is incredible. The idea, the reason I call it a vertical wetland is I got the idea, and other people have, is that you could integrate these things into farming systems and use them to remove excess nutrients, and then use those nutrients to grow food within the wetland that could then be harvested and consumed.
Wonderful. And it could be, this be applied commercially? Are you thinking of, do you have a patent?
No, because one, these technologies aren't mine. So one of the companies in the GTA that does the indoor farming is applying it commercially. The originator of this idea, who is in Brampton, does customized ecosystems, in indoor environments. If you said, well, I'd like to have a ecosystem in my kitchen, because he doesn't do anything, everything is built to the specific room. He could design this for you, and you could have this ecosystem in your kitchen, either just for aesthetics or maybe providing something for you besides the aesthetics, but at least it would clean the air in the kitchen. It'd be an air purification system. So these people have either their patents or trademarks. As I said, I thought the idea of going from their systems to an actual wetland outside that could be integrated into farming, I thought that was so original. Like, I thought, no, it turns out that there's my students have shown me that there's a whole literature on this stuff, and in the literature it's called a constructed flow vertical wetland.
Actually, I saw something, maybe it was a video of a restaurant that was producing part of the food that they used as the ingredients.
Yeah.
Of, their menu was right there in the same, I don't know, in the kitchen or adjoining it, but they were producing a lot of the plants and I think fish. Maybe, I don't know. I can't think of any other animals that you could grow that way.
Well, if they were doing it in a way where the fish and plants supported each other, then they were using this idea. You could also just have conventional fish tanks and conventional aquaponics.
These people actually had them stacked up the way you got it.
So it sounds like they were using this idea, which is great. If people see it in a restaurant, it certainly can be.
And I think even in Asia, I've seen something about places where people have, I don't know whether it's chickens or what, raised above ponds,
yes.
And the droppings of the chickens feed the fish.
I've heard of those. I've actually never seen one of those, but if you're going to engage in working with chickens or turkeys, their manure has a very unique aroma, and you have to be willing to live with that too. So I appreciate all these people who want to have hens in their backyard, so to speak, but I don't know, even if you have a few hens, if my thought is that if that aroma can come out of just a few hens, your neighbors are going to be very unhappy.
I don't know. I grew up with turkeys and chickens.
You don't remember this unique aroma?
No, I remember the drama of my mother ringing. She would grab them by the feet and twist, flip them around and break their necks. Oh. I remember the chickens flopping all over the yard after.
So I didn't grow up with them, but I did spend some time working in a commercial turkey operation. And so that's where I experienced that unique aroma, and usually in the evening it would just float over everything. uh, yeah. So now here's the interesting thing. You could take one of these, so I called them vertical wetlands. Some people would just call them ecosystems, vertical ecosystems, breathing walls, whatever. You could use one of these to probably absorb a lot of that odor. And I know there are people who would market these things to help control odor problems like that in that type of environment. So
what could you use? By the way, the place that really needs it would be the pig farms. They are awful.
So you'd have to build it to the right scale and make sure you're using the right plants in the system. But on a farm, when you have you would use them either or for both for water. So you'd be running a very nutrient-laden water supply into the system that the system would then be able to utilize for itself, or you would use them for air quality, which would also help with the odor as well. And I don't know if it matters so much there's certain plants that are probably much better at absorbing the compounds, like mosses can be very effective as odor control. This is not irrelevant to the whole idea of climate change, because I think what we have to realize, water is intimately tied to the atmosphere. And it comes from the atmosphere, it goes back to the atmosphere. So any time we interfere in that water cycle, we can have a positive or a negative effect on the climate. So your future projection of the electric driverless vehicles that would now free up all this land that we could revegetate would provide more conduits to move water vapor back to the atmosphere, would actually cool the surface more, so it would cool the urban temperatures more. But it would also help us keep the water, reduce the flood risk, but also improve water quality as well. With climate change, we might see more frequent storms or more intense storms, less frequent, but more intense storms. So I want to say the frequency of the intense storms might increase, but as storms reach certain intensity, the water can't be absorbed, and that's where we get the floods from. But if we can green more of the city, then we have barriers literally to those floodwaters that will help mitigate that damage. If you sit down with people from conservation authorities, they may talk about this as well. The idea of they call it daylighting, but it literally means digging up some of these sewers that were built for drainage and recreating the stream that was once there. Interestingly enough, if you look at some of these underground sewage systems that are there for drainage, and you try to find out, well, what was their reasoning for putting them in? Sometimes there really wasn't a great reason, but it was just a thing that we were doing. Anyway, I think I've rambled on for...
I kept you going because I need extra, because I don't know how much of this jackhammer you can hear, but I can hardly hear you. Anyway, it's been fun. I thank you very, very much. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone who's been listening or who will be listening.
Very good. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, sometimes more. This is episode 453. You can watch these or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. And when you get to that website, look around, because we have conversations going on there about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your own thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is a place for dialogue, so please join in. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through PressReader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.